Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sporty's latest webinar on Q&A with ATC, where you're going to learn the answers to the questions pilots ask the most of controllers. I'm Brett Kobe. I'll be your facilitator this evening. I'm with Sporty's Pilot Shop, commonly known as Sporty's. Presentation content tonight is actually brought to us via Pilot Workshops. As many of you may know, Sporty's and Pilot Workshops joined forces this year, so you'll see a lot of new collaborations both on the product and presentation side. A little bit of housekeeping first before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, so if you need to step away, perfectly fine. If you need to watch it again, which I think you're going to want to, I think that's a great idea. You'll be able to do that as well. You can see us. We're on camera here, but we cannot see or hear you, so don't worry about that part of it. You're not on candid camera here, but you will be able to see the presenters, the three air traffic controllers, and Ryan, who I'll introduce here shortly. And I'll mention you can ask questions through the GoToWebinar interface. We'll do the best we can to answer those. I'll be working in the background. I'm a flight instructor for over 25 years, work closely with controllers here in the Cincinnati area, so fairly knowledgeable with the system, and we'll try to answer your questions in the chat area. If we see a lot of questions come through, the same question from multiple attendees, we'll give those over to our host, Ryan, and he'll ask those to the controllers here. We do have a lot of pre-populated questions, the questions that this group hears a lot from pilots and from other groups. And I'll mention also, as Ryan will mention, everyone here is a veteran pilot as well. So they know the system from both the pilot and the ATC side. There's also a section for handouts that you'll see. I think it's called materials in your GoToWebinar console. And what that is are excerpts from Pilot Workshop's pilot-friendly manual called How ATC Really Works. And this is a great follow-up manual for those that are really interested in air traffic control from the pilot's perspective and the controller's perspective. Written by air traffic controllers. Many of the group here tonight have brought input to this book. Anything from how the technology works in the back end, tips and tricks, much farther beyond what the AIM or the FAA handbooks are. But this is like the really important information pilots should know in terms of communication, procedures, that kind of thing. And the manual is on sale currently. You can buy it as a physical copy or an ebook, available at pilotworkshops.com. So a great follow-up resource after the presentation to learn more about air traffic control. As far as the recording goes, this is going to be on the Pilot Workshops YouTube channel, so youtube.com/pilotworkshops. If you haven't subscribed, definitely get on that channel and check it out. They've really increased their content recently. A lot of course previews, a lot of video tips, a lot of great information. There's really great proficiency content that you'll be able to check out there. And for those of us that came through the Sporty's side, you'll also be able to view this webinar on Sporty's blogs and Sporty's YouTube channel. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Koch. Ryan is the head of product development at Pilot Workshops. Been there a long time. Commercial pilot and CFII, specializes in IFR, avionics, and simulation training. And Ryan's going to be working with the presenters tonight to ask the questions and interact and provide you a great presentation. So with that, Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you. All right, Ryan, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Brett. Before we get to the Q&A here, I want to make sure I introduce these three. If you're familiar with Pilot Workshop's Mastery Series, you probably don't need any introduction. But for those who aren't, I'll give you the rundown on these three. So John Krug has 25 years in ATC. That includes training new controllers rather, and time as a QA specialist, as well as investigating accidents and incidents. He also flew turboprops for a Part 135 operator. He's an active flight instructor, and he's building an RV-9A, and I've seen some pictures, and it looks like it's going to be great. So thanks for coming, John.
Thank you, Ryan.
Katrina Linder started her career as a pilot and has over 5,000 hours of flight time in both Part 121 and 135 ops, as well as Part 91. She's an active controller with 18 years of experience in towers, approaches, and center facilities on both coasts, and is an active flight instructor in a busy metro area. How's it going, Katrina?
Good. How are you?
Good. And then we've got Kevin Plant, who has over 20 years of ATC experience in both military and FAA facilities. That also includes on-the-job training of new controllers. He's currently at a busy TRACON. He has been involved in the development of PBN procedures and implementation of new equipment into ATC facilities. He flies for personal travel, plus corporate and charter flying. How's it going, Kevin?
All right.
All right. So the way this is going to work, Brett introduced the basic format here. It's going to be Q&A. We've got a series of topics that we want to talk about with a question to lead off each, and then it's just going to be sort of panel discussion. Many of these come from user submissions from past webinars that Sporties has done. Some of them are requests to our Pilot Workshops Tip of the Week. Others are just questions that I feel like asking them. And so we'll dive in right away with the first question here. This is on the topic of just general comms practices, really. Some of these are going to be VFR specific, some are IFR specific, and some are general like this. So the question is, and I'm going to throw this to you first, John. Some pilots read back every word of every instruction they get from ATC. Some of them are much more selective and lean on Roger and Wilco and things like that a lot. What are the things that you must read back? What are the things that you should read back? And where's the sweet spot there?
Well, the regulatory requirement is to read back certain things like hold short. Okay, if controller gives you a hold short of the runway instruction, that's a required read back, and it's a required read back with your call sign. All too often we hear Wilcos and partial acknowledgments, but without a call sign, it doesn't do the controller any good. The flip side of that is you don't need to just think mainly read back numbers. There's very few words that you need to read back. I hear a lot of controller will say something like traffic no longer a factor, squawk 1200, contact the tower, words to that effect. All the controller needs to hear back there is 1200 and tower. And you don't need to read back the fact that traffic's no longer a factor. Same with an instrument approach clearance. The standard instrument approach clearance is the PTAC, I call it position, time, altitude, and clearance. 5 miles from the fix and maintain 2,500 till established, whatever. You don't need to read back your position. Everybody knows where you are, and that it just takes up a lot of airtime. So basically, just the numbers the controller needs to hear back.
Yeah, and then I think another thing that holds up that contributes to mic fright probably is the fear that you're not going to say things the right way, the by the book way. Mm-hmm. How important is standard phraseology versus just saying what you mean to say in plain English? Well,
there's multiple times when making it up is what you need to do. If you're trying to explain something to a controller, maybe it's a weather deviation, or if you're doing something non-standard, like a sightseeing tour or something like that. But for the most part, you think about all the things that the exchanges go back and forth. You call ready at the end of the runway. Controller says one of two things: cleared for takeoff. Well, three things: cleared for takeoff, line up, wait, or hold short. And you just repeat back one of those three. So there's a lot of canned exchanges back and forth. And if you keep them as small and as simple as you can, you're going to make everybody's life as easy as possible.
Sure. And there's some things that are maybe red flags, things that you shouldn't say. I know one thing that the internet hates is when pilots say "with you" when they check in. Katrina, how do you feel about that? Is that really a problem, or?
I mean, anything that's extra phraseology is just unnecessary. And also, I think kind of like John was saying about, other phraseology, we already know that you're here because you're talking. So yeah. It's really just unnecessary verbiage. Yeah, that's not one of my favorites. I always try and get that out of the language of any students that I have, but.
Sure. Yeah. But there are worse things. There's meowing on guard, right? That could stop. All All right, let's move on to the next question here. This is about VFR flight following, and the question is, if I'm just going to be flying around in the practice area, should I still get flight following, or is that sometimes a burden on ATC? No, we think of flight following as going A to B, I'm going to get it. But if you're just kind of sightseeing, for example, or doing maneuvers, should you still get it? I'll put that one to you, Katrina, as well. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm in kind of an odd situation now because where I currently fly, we actually have a CTAF for our practice areas with defined names for each practice area, and also like, things that we are like typical reporting points too. And so in our situation, you wouldn't really get flight following from approach control because you really should be on that CTAF frequency. And that appears on the sectional or the TAC for my area. I don't remember which. So I think it's worth looking at the area that you are currently flying in and seeing what are the procedures that are recommended there. I think it would be actually a problem if you got trying to get flight following from the overlying approach control in this case, and we're not on the CTAF frequency.
Would you recommend to someone that they monitor the overlying approach while they're also on the CTAF, or at what point does it become just too much? Pick one.
I would say here, I would not recommend that. And generally, because you're also maneuvering and you're typically doing some sort of you're not just going en route. You're monitoring, in this case, a CTAF. I think it's too much to add an additional approach control as well. But I'll throw that over to maybe Kevin to see what he thinks about that. But I'm sure he's got some opinion.
No,
yeah.
As putting myself in the cockpit, I agree with you. I'm very much an advocate for listening to the appropriate ATC frequency whenever you're flying around. But I think practice area, number one, if you're in the practice area, you're doing some sort of flight training. So in that situation, trying to monitor two separate frequencies and have some awareness that way, I don't think that's realistic to expect of a pilot. I will say, though, that regarding the practice area thing, the way that we usually have it happen is it'll be one, maybe two of the airplanes in the practice area will call up for radar advisories. And then there'll be several others that are just 1200 codes floating around. And what I will do, I think what most of us will do, is if we have a gaggle of VFRs in a practice area, we generally will try to take our IFRs around that area and avoid it entirely with the IFR traffic, regardless of whether there's anybody in there getting radar advisories. But when somebody's getting radar advisories in a practice area, I'll do the best I can to keep you updated on traffic. And if you see somebody else in the practice area where I've called traffic, okay, great. But maybe 2 minutes later, you've lost them because you're out there maneuvering, you're doing turns or stalls or whatever it is that you're doing. And then I've got a whole multiple other sectors generally that I'm also working and having to deal with. So there certainly could be times where my attention just isn't on somebody that's in the practice area, even though they're getting radar advisories. And that goes to the whole workload permitting part of basic radar services to VFR aircraft. If I'm doing other stuff, I'm not necessarily going to tell you, hey, I'm vectoring for approaches at this other airport, and I'm giving this guy clearance off this other airport, and working out some spacing between some other airplanes, or asking questions of adjacent sectors for just routine coordination. That's all stuff that can take my attention away from focusing strictly on somebody in a practice area. So I'd also caution a false sense of security with, yes, we're going to look out for you. If you're in the practice area, we want to help you out the very best we can, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be just solely focusing on what you're doing in the practice area and constantly keeping you advised if there's any traffic that's a conflict.
Yeah. So not, hey, we're going to do a steep turn to the left now. Okay, got it. I'll watch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
John.
So I just, wanted to maybe put a little overview on this too from both sides of it. So when I'm in the cockpit, especially as an instructor, and as Kevin said, you're talking a lot to the other pilot, and it's very easy to miss calls. And what we always wind up doing is, you turn the radio down a little bit so that you can talk back and forth. But I still think there's a lot of value in getting it, but it generally the whole air traffic thing, I always say, is very situational, and the answer that I have to give, and people don't necessarily want to hear, is it depends, and it depends so much upon local practices. We think of air traffic, if I could expand just another minute or so here. We as pilots think of air traffic. We pick up the microphone, we talk to somebody, and you expect a kind of a universal response. But it's really not like that. When you think about the differences between en route centers, Katrina's case, you're looking, you may have a sector that goes from the surface to 40,000 feet or something. So you're looking at jets moving high, and maybe you've got a couple of people down really low. Approach controls may have multiple airports that they're working, and different equipment. They can see different things than the center can. The center can see different things. Then there's military approach controls. There's towers with radar. There's towers without radar. So it really very, very much depends upon what the local situation is and who you're talking to. It's very difficult to get a one-size-fits-all answer on a lot of these. And a lot of it is just knowing the local procedures and asking if necessary, saying, I'm going to be flying around. Will they give me advisories out there or not? Is there a CTAF, or does everybody kind of switch over to a common frequency? That kind of tribal knowledge helps a lot too.
Yeah, this is probably another it depends question, but when someone does call up with an initial call for flight following, do you like to hear the whole spiel about position and altitude and requests and type and all that at once, or would you rather a cold call and then the rest of the info when you're asked for it?
I always liked getting the call sign first, because the first thing that you're doing is typing that into the keyboard and getting ready to issue a code. I also like to hear that that first call is VFR, because then you start looking around. Did I just take a handoff on somebody? Did I miss a handoff on somebody? Oh, this is a new customer, if you will. So at least with radar, I was always an advocate of getting the controller's attention with the call sign, and then they'll get back to you.
Yeah, Katrina.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, I say that varies a lot also. So go ahead.
I just wanted to add that one of the things I was taught when I first started radar air traffic really in general, but especially applicable to radar, is that you might be able to get 3 pieces of information to a pilot. They'll for sure get 2, but 3's kind of pushing it. And you have to be careful about how you say it. And that applies to controllers too. So if there's a reasonably, moderately busy sector and you hear a lot of talking, they're probably not going to get 4 pieces of information, So you kind of have to use John's word, it depends. It really depends on how busy the sector is. If it's quiet, that might be just as bad as busy, because you might be talking to the person sitting next to you because you don't have a lot going on. So, but I really think that the maximum of 3 pieces of information thing is good to remember, because I really think it applies in both directions.
Yeah, that's a good tip. All right, somewhat related topic, transitioning airspace. Let's say you are on flight following, talking to approach, your route's going to cut through the top of a Class D. My question is approach automatically going to handle that for you, or do you need to do something? Because you're talking to approach, they're not necessarily the controlling agency of the delta that you need to be talking to in order to go through it. Kevin, what say you to that?
Absolutely, that is approach control's job. If you're flying along and you're getting radar services, that they are responsible for coordinating any transition through the Glass Delta if it's necessary. And sometimes that sort of transition is already covered with a letter of agreement between the tower and approach control, depending on how you'll be transitioning. Approach might restrict you in some way transitioning and how you transition the Delta to be in compliance with that. But yeah, that's approach control's job to sort that out for a pilot, as long as you're transitioning, not landing there.
Yeah, is it ever worth asking just to be certain? Because they don't necessarily know in your VFR exactly what route and altitude you're going to fly. Is it worth clarifying what that's going to be?
Sure, if you're unsure, I think anytime you're unsure, it's worth clarifying with ATC. But with transitioning a Delta like this, especially if you plan on doing something that's different from what you've been doing, then that's worth sorting out. Say you're cruising along at whatever altitude and you're straight and level, and then you're going to make a turn or a descent into or through a Delta. It's can't hurt anything to say something to ATC that, hey, I was doing this, but now I'm going to be doing this. Want to make sure that's still okay.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, here's a related question on that topic. Suppose you're flying into a Bravo and you get a vector that would take you into the Bravo, but you don't have the explicit clearance. Is that enough to count as clearance into the Bravo? Heading at an altitude that would take you into it?
No, that's a trap. You have to have a clearance for Bravo airspace, period. And if you are on a vector and you're pointed at the Bravo, then you're probably in that controller's sector. That controller probably owns Bravo. So ask them, and they should give you the Bravo clearance.
Yeah, somebody made a mistake there. Don't let it be both of you, I suppose, right?
Sure.
Potentially. Okay, let's jump into the IFR world for a bit here. And the question is, when is it okay to simply file direct? And I think there are two ways that you might think of this question. One is, around here, I fly in the Midwest, you could legitimately go 500 miles on a direct line in practically any direction and be okay with respect to airspace and terrain. The other way to interpret this question, I think, is in busy airspace. Maybe we'll start there because you all have a lot of experience in busy airspace. Some pilots will just file direct knowing that they're not going to get that, but knowing that they're going to get what ATC wants them to have anyway, and they may as well just save themselves the work and let ATC tell them what they're going to get. Is that, I'll put this to you, Katrina, does that rub you the wrong way as a controller in busy airspace when you get a direct route filed and you have to, I don't know, do you have to come up with the route then? Is that extra work for you? Does it feel lazy? What's your take on that?
Well, I would say first, if you're going to stay within a single facility, then filing direct is not as much of a problem. Because when I worked in an approach control, we would just give people radar vectors direct clearances, and they didn't have any fixes in their flight plan, and that's fine. If you are going from one facility to another, then yes, I generally would consider that to be lazy and potentially hazardous, honestly, because now I work in a place where there's a lot of terrain. And my view, well, the way I was trained here is if somebody files a route, as long as their altitude is appropriate, we are taught to make the assumption that you have looked at the terrain along your route of flight and you have decided whether or not you need to fly a obstacle departure procedure, for example, or whether you can do the visual climb over the airport if there is one. And we're taught that we should not mess with your route because then we are taking responsibility for your terrain clearance, and sometimes I can't because you're not above my minimum IFR altitude. So that's kind of the hazardous side of it. I do find it lazy generally just because anytime you move from one facility to another, there is some sort of way that you transition from that facility, like when you're crossing those boundaries. And there, you don't want to be in the place where you shouldn't be anyway. So it is better for you to be on some sort of standard route at the altitude that the next facility expects you at. Just because it's set up that way for a reason. It's kind of like the westbound lanes of a highway, getting on it and going eastbound instead. You want to be in a place because it's been set aside for people to be descending or arriving into that airspace versus keeping you away from the aircraft that are climbing out. And so I honestly, also the other piece is ForeFlight gives you so many options for routes as well that I really think you can just look at the route advisor, select something, even if it's just a couple of VORs or something along your route. That actually helps automation as well. There are existing preferred routes that if you just file direct from, say, a relatively, not the major airport within an approach control, but maybe another smaller towered or untowered airport, if you file from that point direct to another, again, not the major airport that the approach control was set up to work, the computer may not know how you should get from point A to point B. And that can cause some automation issues, or like you'll enter a tiny little piece of this airspace and it won't know who to hand you off to. And you can really fix that so easily just by adding a couple of points. And then the computer says, oh, hey, actually, we want them to fly this way. And a lot of those preferred routes just eliminate issues, terrain issues, traffic issues, letter of agreement issues. And I also think it's a lot better to receive a full route clearance on the ground than it is to get it in the air. Because in my case, again, I was trained to let you take off and start climbing out. And then once you're above the, whatever my minimum instrument altitude is, now I can change your routing to something that matches what the next facility needs. So anyway, very long answer, but yes, I don't think filing direct works anytime you're working beyond a single facility.
So it might get accepted in the first place, but then once you get airborne, you'll get rerouted, and that's the time when you're busier and would prefer not to be busy.
Yeah, I don't want to be heads down programming my GPS, to put in whatever route I've just received while I'm trying to climb out and fly the airplane, and I don't think any students need that experience either, for sure.
Yeah. Kevin.
Another consideration with this is if I'm working a sector and I've got a fair amount going on, as I routinely do, and you come out of a non-towered airport, you depart, you call up airborne, hey, let's pick up my IFR to wherever. And I say, okay, hang on, I got to go find that clearance for you. And then I find it, and you filed direct from, like we're looking at in the graphic here, from Boston maybe to Pennsylvania somewhere, and that route's going to take you on a direct line through New York approach airspace. No, you can't have that. And by the way, I'm kind of busy working airplanes right now. I don't have time to go look up your route and fix it for you. So I'll try to get some help from somebody else in the TRACON to be able to help me out and amend the routing and get you going the way that you're supposed to be going. But right now, in that situation, you're a VFR aircraft and you have lower priority than my IFR aircraft. So if I'm busy doing IFR stuff with all my traffic I have already, sorry, you've taken a number now, so I have your request, but it might be a little bit, and that might not be what you're really expecting to hear after you departed a non-towered airport.
All right, let's move on to getting the clearance, IFR clearance. John, I'll put this one to you. In general, when someone's departing a non-towered airport, would you rather have them get a clearance before they depart or airborne? Obviously, there are pros and cons for the pilot on this issue, but setting that aside for a moment, do you, would you prefer the pilot to block the airspace with the, with the void time or whatever, or pop up in your airspace looking for clearance?
Well, generally, I would say that it's preferable to get the clearance on the ground, and you could separate the clearance and the release. Clearance is one thing, and as Kevin said, that may involve changing a route in the computer and then reading a full route clearance to the airplane. Most of the time, and facilities vary a lot, but most of the time, the clearance delivery frequency would be the flight data person would be the one either on the telephone or an RCO. Sometimes it's the radar controller, sometimes it's not. If you could pawn off that task on somebody else, hey, fix this route and read it to this guy, that would take a lot off the radar controller who's busy talking airplanes. So recently the facility directory has added phone numbers for almost all towers. So depending upon where you are, whoever answers that phone may be in a better place to read that full route clearance rather than the control when it's airborne. Second part of that then is the release, and that can be a whole different set of complications depending upon how much airspace has to be blocked, who you have to coordinate with, because a lot of times an airplane will come off a satellite and it may be in your airspace, but almost immediately it's in someone else's airspace too. So you got to coordinate with them. There's a lot of pieces there that may be better to do a VFR departure if it's possible. But again, very situational. But long answer to a short question, I prefer the pilot to get the clearance on the ground.
Gotcha. I want to jump over to some of the questions that were getting submitted by the audience here.
Yeah.
Here are two questions that I think are probably related. The first one is, with ADS-B out on our aircraft, does the controller already see my N number on their display? And then the other question is, I was flying 2 weeks ago outside of Wilmington airspace, and they contacted me by my call sign and asked if I was on frequency. I obviously answered, is this normal? I was impressed that they asked. So one question might answer the other there, right? Kevin, I see you nodding.
Yep, that's
What's up with
spot on
ADS-B?
accurate. Yeah, so we can see call sign on ADS-B, and there's other data that can be pulled up, but not a lot. But call sign is the one that we can reliably get on anybody that's transmitting ADS-B. All
right. Let's jump on to the next question here, dealing with weather. So the typical GA cockpit has access to many nearly real-time weather products. What does ATC have that's better or different? Kevin.
Well, as an approach controller, we have access to precipitation intensity, and that's it. We do not see lightning strikes. We don't see frontal boundaries. We don't see gust fronts. We don't see, we could go on and on. But yeah, that's it. 6 levels of precipitation intensity. We don't see precipitation type. We don't see what altitude the precipitation exists at. All we see is intensity.
But it's basically real time, right? As opposed to NextRad in the cockpit that you might have over data link.
It is. It's pretty current. It's not as current as it used to be in the analog days where it would update every radar sweep. It's just slightly more delayed than that. So, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's pretty quick. We're talking not more than a minute or two old of data we're looking at, but it's no longer every radar sweep.
And does that depend, John, on the facility?
Yeah, so Katrina could probably answer that better, knowing because the en route folks definitely have delayed. They have much more like the NextRad that you see on the internet rather than, that's the difference between a terminal and an en route radar. But could you expand on that, Katrina?
Sure. Like you said, it's much more delayed. The other thing, that's important to know is we don't display any light precipitation whatsoever. It's only moderate intensity through extreme. And so we don't get the 6 levels that, like Kevin actually has a lot more detail than I would get at a center.
Okay. And of course, you have access to everybody else that's flying, right? So you can get ride reports and things like that and PIREPs. What kind of PIREPs do you, what kind of PIREPs are most valuable to you or to other pilots, would you say?
I'm always looking for TOPS reports in particular, especially when we're talking about icing. We get a ton of icing where I'm at, and it can be in a really tiny little band. It might, they might be saying it's anywhere in this 15,000 feet, but realistically it's in this, maybe in the cloud tops for 1,500 feet or something like that. So that information is super helpful. Because we end up in a lot of situations where we need to get smaller aircraft out of icing. And yes, mostly just like, what are people actually experiencing in the vicinity of this weather? A lot of times we have deviations around the light precip that we can't see. And so I'd love to know, what are they seeing in that situation? Are they getting a lot of turbulence or chop? And yeah, icing is a massive concern here.
So do you have, if you look at a non-towered airport, do you have access to the ASOS or AWOS, like the up to the minute weather there, or would you just be seeing the METAR?
I can pull that up, yeah. Well, if they're at a non-towered airport where there is no METAR, I can see, I don't know how often they update it. It's not every minute, but it might be like there is some interval, and I'm going to guess it's like somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. So we will get those updates. But for the airports that have METARs, we just have the hourly one.
Sure, okay. So not necessarily more current weather in that case than you would get on your iPad, or certainly than
No,
you would get actually tuning into the frequency and then listening to the ASOS, right?
definitely not. Definitely not in that case.
There's another question here that I know, Kevin, you've spoken to before. What does ATC mean when they ask you if you have the NOTAMs for your destination, or why are they asking you that?
Oh, that's ATC failing in their duties as a providing a service if they're asking you if you have the NOTAMs. That's another one, kind of like the vector pointed at the Bravo airspace. If they're asking you that question, it might be a trap. ATC is responsible for telling pilots about pertinent NOTAMs for non-towered airports that they're going into. If you've checked NOTAMs before you departed, and then 3 hours later you're getting to your destination and ATC asks you that, it would be reasonable to say, yeah, I checked NOTAMs before I departed. You're not going to incriminate yourself and say, NOTAMs? Nah, I don't check those. Of course not. But it's not to say that certainly things could have changed in between when you check NOTAMs and right now when ATC is asking the question. So it's a bad spot to be in when ATC asks that question. I am an advocate for stacking the deck in your favor, and with all that we have now in terms of data link, weather information in the cockpit, whether that's XM, whether it's ADS-B, whether now people are getting Starlink internet in the cockpit a lot of times, there are a lot of different resources that even as a renter, you can get portable things that stick on the side of a window in the airplane that will give you the data link information so you have current NOTAM information. So no, I would always, you can ask ATC if they have anything that's pertinent. If ATC is asking you that, they're probably just doing it because they always do that. I don't think that there's anything malicious about it, but a lot of controllers will do that, unfortunately.
Question here that's related to the last couple questions that we talked about. This one's from the audience again. It's, can I use ADS-B airport weather in busy airspace rather than trying to find a break in the chatter to request a brief frequency change to get the AWOS? So can ADS-B weather be a substitute for the AWAS, at least when it's busy, and it would be a pain to find the time to get the other. John, I see you kind of shrugging.
I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really, I think, more of a flight standards question. Is that a legal weather source? Because you don't really, from air traffic side, you don't really care where they get the weather as long as they get it. The requirement is more on the operator to get the weather to decide whether it's within their minimums or not, or whatever. So the only ATC requirement really is the ATIS. You have the ATIS, and that you can get, and digital ATISs you can get through ADSB. But whether that's a legal substitute or not, I don't think that's an ATC ruling.
Yeah, I suppose the thing is to know what the difference is between the two, right? If you're getting ADSB weather, you're getting a METAR. And whereas if you listen to the AWAS or the ASOS, it's probably up to the minute. If you're getting weather from ADSB as opposed to listening to the ATIS, it might be the same weather, but you're missing everything else that comes with the ATIS, runways in use and NOTAMs and things like that. So it's not exactly the same thing.
Right, and you can look at the age of your ADSB update. Displays will have that, but do you really know that you've got the most current?
Right.
I mean,
so this is a question that we sort of addressed already, but what should I do if I'm approaching Class B airspace, don't yet have a clearance, can't get a word in on the busy frequency? We talked about having a vector that takes you into it, but this is a little bit different because this, the pilot in this situation, I assume, knows that they can't enter the airspace. What's the thing to do there? Because if you just start circling or descending under a shelf, or what's the most predictable thing that you might do there?
Turn away.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's. Go ahead.
If you're coming up on the Bravo and for whatever reason you haven't gotten a clearance and you can't get a word in to get a clearance, it's possible that you're not even on the right frequency. You could have missed a frequency change or something, and the controller that would like to give you a clearance isn't the controller that you're talking to, and they're wondering where you are and why you're not talking to them. So that's possible too, but definitely don't go into Bravo airspace without a clearance.
Yeah, right. And I suppose that we've too much it depends latitude here. We could say, suppose you are talking to the right controller, they've told you to expect a Bravo clearance, you're going to a satellite airport or something below it, an inner shelf of the Bravo, and so that clearance is coming, or you're expecting it to be coming. In that case, I could see where someone would be reluctant to just turn away when the controller you might assume is not expecting you to go into the airspace without a clearance, but it's forthcoming, right? I guess maybe a related. Yeah, go ahead.
It could be, but it might not be either. And it could be that one controller looked at what the next sector is doing, saying, oh yeah, and the controller's thinking, if I was working that sector, I'd totally give you a Bravo clearance over there. And so maybe they say, you can expect a Bravo clearance for the next sector, and then you check in with the next sector, and that's when you can't get a word in. And the situation is either different than the prior sector thought, or the comfort level with the other controller is different than the prior controller, or any number of things that have changed in the interim. Or maybe it's the same sector, and for whatever reason, I haven't given you a Bravo clearance yet, but I thought I probably would in a couple of minutes. And then I go on break, somebody else gets me out and is like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not giving a Bravo clearance there. What are you, crazy? So that sort of thing can happen. Or it could be that a controller needs to coordinate with an adjacent sector, and that adjacent sector says no when normally they would say yes. So there's a lot of reasons that you could, by all good intentions, be expecting to get a Bravo clearance. Controller could have told you that, yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. And then for whatever reason, it doesn't come out. Well, you don't have the Bravo clearance, don't go on the Bravo.
Yeah, don't assume that you know what the controller meant to do. right?
It's also important to know that the word expect can mean different things. When IFR, if you're told to expect an altitude after 10 minutes or expect a routing, those are contingencies for lost comm. If a controller tells you expect a class Bravo clearance with the next sector and you can't get a word in, that doesn't constitute that NORDO permission. So you still have to hear it, even if you were told to expect it.
Yeah, Katrina.
I was just going to add that if you can't get a word in edgewise, that means they're busy, which means that the situation may have changed. I know we're kind of all saying that, but of all the times not to enter Class Bravo airspace unexpectedly, it would be when the controller is busy.
Yeah, there's a related thing here that we've talked about, I know, in IFR Mastery before, which is under IFR, when you're getting vectored for an approach and the frequency is busy and you're about to pass through the final approach course, but you haven't been told to intercept it, or you haven't been cleared for the approach yet, there would be some temptation to turn inbound because flying through that approach course could mess up the sequence, right? And they're not supposed to vector you through without telling you that's what they're doing. And so you might anticipate there that I'm going to be helpful. I'm going to do what they meant to tell me to do, or they would if the frequency was clear, right? Is that different at all, or is that still a situation? I know it's going to be another, it depends, right? But John, what do you think there?
No, it depends. As Katrina said, if there's a reason why the controller can't get back to you, it's probably because they're slammed and they can't. Just turn away. It's the best you can do.
Does identing ever help if you're trying to get attention?
Sometimes, yeah, it'll make the data block flash. I wouldn't use it to get a controller's attention if I'm looking for the Class B clearance, but if I've gone through the localizer and need to turn in, or I'm tracking the localizer or the final approach course coming up on the final approach fix and I haven't been cleared yet, something like that, an ident might get somebody's attention. I would reserve it for more imminent type situations than just anytime you fly around a Class B or even any airport that requires coordination. You really got to have a plan B set to not enter the Class B. You know, stop your climb, stop your descent, turn away, do something. You don't want to get into a box canyon.
All right, here's a question that I don't think will have a it depends answer. The controllers have their ATC handbook, which is the Joint Order 7110.65. Is that a good read for pilots who want to improve their ATC communications? And if not, what would you suggest for someone who's looking to get better on the radio?
Pilot workshops books.
All right, okay. That goes without saying.
I mean, if you have insomnia, then it's a good read.
Yeah.
One way to think about it would be if somebody handed you the works of Shakespeare, for example, and said, try to make sense out of all this and understand what's going on here. If you've not ever been explained any of what's going on or context or what iambic pentameter means and that sort of thing, probably you're going to struggle really badly with it. I know I would. And the 0.65 is another one there where if you lack the context of how the stuff works, really, then probably it's not going to work. There's a reason that when controllers are hired, whether it's military or FAA or whatever, you're not just handed the book and say, study this for a couple of weeks, then there'll be a test, and then we're going to plug in. There's classroom, and there's a whole bunch of it where we learn what all this is and it's explained how it all works and comes together. So I think it would be a tall order to ask somebody to read through this and be able to make a lot of sense of it without any instruction to go along with it. Now, having said that, if you have a specific question about a specific thing, sure, maybe you can look around in the 0.65 and see if you can find an answer. But as something to read through just to gain general knowledge, probably you're not going to get a lot out of it.
Right.
But it is the Shakespeare of our time.
Maybe that was a bad analogy, but
No, I gotcha. I'm with you there.
Yeah. Actually, I like that.
All right, this is kind of a one for each of you, I think. If you could tell pilots one thing, what would it be? What's the one thing that you see pilots messing up a lot? The one tip that you would give? The question that we haven't asked here yet, and if you can think of one, I'd like to hear from each of you what that would be. Put you on the spot a little bit.
All right. I would say the essence of everything that we do is communication, because we're separated by air, and almost everything that we do is the spoken word. So I would say the best thing that you could do is listen carefully and be succinct in your transmissions.
all right,
Next.
I'll build on that a little bit, and I'll say that when you get a frequency change from ATC, when you hear the new frequency and you switch over to it, listen for a good 15 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever. Probably the vast majority of time, there is not some imminent situation that needs to be corrected the moment you check on the next frequency. So if you listen for just a second, get a little awareness, and you'll have a better sense of when it's appropriate to speak up and announce yourself on this new frequency. And also you'll have a little bit more awareness of what's going on around you.
Ryan, you're muted.
All right. Katrina, do you have an example or a common mistake that you see often, or any pet peeve?
I mean, I would basically be saying the same things if I were going to say tell the pilots one thing. I guess one pet peeve from center is that people think I can't hear them. But for most of my frequencies, I have 2 or even 3 transmitters in different locations. And I'm listening simultaneously on all of those, but I'm only communicating on the one that makes sense for whoever I'm talking to. So I've had people who just don't check in on my frequency because they're like, oh, I couldn't hear you. So the center is a little bit different that way. But yeah, we have a lot of terrain, and usually they put a transmitter on either side of that terrain. So sometimes listening doesn't mean you're going to hear everything that's happening on the frequency.
Yeah,
Something else that pilots need to be aware of, and like Kevin said, when you switch to the new frequency, you have at least at a bare minimum, you've got 2 frequencies that you're transmitting and listening to, and it's VHF and UHF. Very often a sector will have multiple other frequencies, whether you're combined with something or you have an RCO or remote frequencies. So you may have 4, 5, 6 frequencies in your ear all at once. Just because you're not hearing anything on the one that you just switched to doesn't mean that the controller is not listening to a readback on another frequency that you can't hear. And that's why it's important to listen for a brief period of time, because you can tell by that exchange, that back and forth, and you hear it all the time, that the controller is talking to someone that you can't hear. And you know, if the controller gives an instruction to turn or climb or something like that, and you don't hear a response, don't jump in right then, because you know that they're getting that from another frequency. So wait till they hear you, the acknowledgement or reasonable time, something like that.
Yeah. We have a few minutes left here. I want to hit some more of the questions that were submitted by the audience. Here's one that says, in the past, IFR was always Victor Airways, and now we can go direct anywhere, but it seems that some fixes that you might pick are not valid or not accepted by the ATC system. The question specifically is, can you use airports as fixes? You know, A to B to C, but they're airports that you intend to fly over. But I think more broadly, like what is accepted in IFR routes and what isn't? What can you use and what can't you?
Well, using airports is generally not a good idea because the system will look, it processes routes based upon airports. So if you were flying over another airport and just using that as a fix, it may interpret that that is your destination and try to assign you the SAR or routing to that airport when you don't really want that. The system, the flight planning system is still very crude. Here we are in 2025, and you still have to do like 6, 7, 10 amendments and things like that. People, and anybody in ATC would know that it's very clunky, the interface. So pick a 5-letter identifiable fix near there, and use that for your flight planning. Don't use the VP fixes that are the visual points for an IFR flight plan, and don't use those CNF fixes, the ones that are in parentheses, because ATC doesn't know about those either.
Right, computer fixes that are just for your GPS.
Yeah.
And if you were to, if you're just rubber banding the route and the waypoint that pops up happens to be on some random approach that you're flying over, but it's not on the low end route chart, do those tend to be valid too?
They would know about it, but may or may not be known. The controller in a sector, a GPS approach might have 5 or 6 fixes in that approach that you never use. I think it'd be better to use something that's on an airway or prominently displayed on the IFR chart rather than picking something off a instrument approach.
The system will allow any of these fixes, like what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's just the controller probably won't know where they are.
Right.
Well, it
Gotcha.
won't allow the CNF. The system will not allow a CNF. It will kick
Right.
back typically what we would call an FRD, fixed radial distance, instead of the CNF. In fact, at my previous facility, we actually had a CNF changed because the routing was to leave, one of our preferred routes was to leave the airway at the CNF. And I was like, well, if this becomes part of our preferred route and now we're leaving this route at that point, we should make this an intersection. So they finally did. Yeah, so that's just one example, but CNFs will typically not work in a flight plan.
One more question to wrap up on here. This is another one submitted by the audience. Do you get tired of dealing with students training? For example, repeating patterns, messing up calls, all the mistakes that student pilots make. Kevin, you got a big smile there.
Every single one of us, all of us, at some point were a student of whether it was ATC or flying airplanes. We have all been there. And so I feel your pain of the student pilots that are worried about that. I totally get it. So it's totally fine. Yes, there are times when that can be kind of like annoying or frustrating when the student pilot, not from being malicious, they just don't know, will do things on frequency that will tie things up or be a distraction or not helpful or any number of things that way. But really, we get it. We've all been there. It's a learning process. It's okay. Don't be discouraged. And a lot of it will get easier with time and good practice.
I agree with all that, but you've all been there. How many controllers in your facility would you say are pilots who have been there before?
Well, okay, only a handful are pilots, but it's not different as when you're a brand new controller. You get a brand new controller and your first time plugging in and talking to airplanes, and there's a similar lack of confidence, saying the wrong thing, stumbling, starting to make a transmission and then unkeying and trying to get your thoughts together, thinking out loud. All of that sort of thing happens to controllers. So that's not unique to pilots that way.
Yeah, everyone is familiar with learning and making mistakes. All right. Well, that reaches the end of our allotted time here. I want to remind everybody about the Pilot Workshops Pilot Friendly Manual, How ATC Really Works. That's available at pilotworkshops.com. It's got a lot of the same sorts of topics that we talked about here. It's in a QA format like this was. And then this webinar is going to go up on youtube.com/pilotworkshops, the Pilot Workshops channel, probably tomorrow. So you can check back for the recording if you wanted to watch it again and tell all your friends. Thanks, everybody, and have a great night.
Good night.